Hey, what's up guys, it's Disturbed, and today I'm going to be showing you an amazing DPS build that can dish out insane damage while still being tanky as all hell. So first off, we're going to be looking at the gear. This will be pretty in-depth, but trust me, it's worth it because there is a lot of stuff that's worth knowing about. Before I say anything, I just want to emphasize that the DPS stat does not mean anything. It doesn't mathematically calculate your DPS. It just takes random factors into account, and it's not accurate at all. So when building your character, don't waste your time worrying about the DPS stat, just pay attention to the actual damage you're doing to your enemies. Another thing, my gear is not perfect, and you can definitely improve upon it, and I will go over how you can do that whilst I'm showing you the build. Also, before any Strikers Battlegear Crusaders start commenting below saying that this isn't the best setup, trust me, it is. I've tested every single DPS setup you can use, i.e. 4-set Striker, 2-set Sentry, 4-set Striker with Reckless Chest and Savage Gloves, 3-set Sentry and 3-set Striker, etc. And the way I have it set up now performs way better than all the other setups, and that's why I'm using it. Alright, so we're going to be starting off with the weapons. For your primary weapon, you want to be using a submachine gun. Pretty much, it's pretty obvious. For your secondary weapon, you want to be using either an AR or an M1A. I think an M1A is way better, but it is up to personal preference. For modding your SMG, you want to be using headshot damage and crit chance on the scope. And then for your magazine, you want magazine size and either critical hit damage or rate of fire. If you're using an AUG, I would say rate of fire, but if it's a vector, I'd say magazine damage or crit damage, and then if it's an MP5, I'd say rate of fire as well. For your grip, you can use any grip with hip fire accuracy, and it can either have horizontal stability or accuracy. I can't tell which one is better yet, so I'm just using horizontal stability. And then for your muzzle, you want stability and critical hit damage. I've also heard that accuracy and critical hit damage is good too. Doesn't matter that much though, because an SMG doesn't really have that much recoil to begin with. For your M1A, what you want to be using for your scope is headshot damage and crit chance, magazine size, and weapon damage. For the underbarrel, you want accuracy and horizontal stability. And for your muzzle, you want stability and critical hit damage. Now, if you don't have balanced on it, which is the best talent, but if you don't have balance on your M1A, then I would suggest using horizontal stability and normal stability just because there's more recoil involved. But yeah. Now, in terms of talents that you want, Brutal is probably the best one that you can get on an SMG, and then I have Vicious and Meticulous. Those aren't the best, but other really good ones that you can get, I would say, is you can get Brutal, Deadly, Fierce, but only if it's a third talent, so you don't have to stack all that electronics. Same thing with Ferocious, Destructive, Self-Preserved, and the one that increases your damage when you're closer to the enemy. I can't remember, but all those are pretty top tier, so try to get a good mix of those. I got this AUG from the vendor, and then so it's pretty good. And then for your M1A, just make sure that it has balanced on it. I heard that they're going to be fixing that soon, so if they end up fixing that, then you just want to make sure that it has brutal on it. And then, you know, there's a few other talents that I named that would be pretty good on the AUG that would be good on the M1A as well. Your pistol doesn't really matter. I just have a 204 gear score one just for gear score purposes. Now, you're going to be using 4-set Sentry, and then in addition to that, you're going to be using Reckless Chest Piece and Savage Gloves. So to start off with the chest piece, the Reckless talent increases your damage by 13.5% and increases incoming damage by 10%. As of right now, the increasing damage by 10% isn't actually working. The increased incoming damage, excuse me, it isn't working, and it actually makes you take less damage, 10% less damage. They are going to be fixing this in the future, but the whole point of this build is to be some semi-glass cannon, and it is for PvE, so against NPCs and whatnot. So I would still suggest using it even after they patch it, because your extra 13.5% damage is pretty big. Now, in terms of the stats on your chest piece, you want armor. Now, before I say anything else, you want to get a good balance of armor. You want to have about 60 to 65%. That's way more important than stacking health. So try to get armor. My armor isn't the best, but that's because I need to re-roll the mod slot on my holster for armor. But yeah, for your chest piece, you want to try to get armor and damage to elites. Now, you can either switch out health for a mod slot or do something like that, but I needed to get armor, so I couldn't switch it out. But I'm happy with the way that it is. Just make sure that it has damage to elites. For your mask, you can get critical hit chance on it for the major attribute, but I actually got a extra mod slot, and I've crafted a bunch of these trying to get a better one. Haven't been able to get one. Other minor attributes you can also get damage to elites, which is pretty nice as well. And just make sure it has a mod slot on it. And then for your knee pads, make sure that it has critical hit damage, and then 10% enemy armor damage is pretty good for minor attributes. And then just make sure it has a mod slot on it. For your backpack, make sure it has critical hit damage. Minor attributes don't matter that much. You might be able to get enemy armor damage, but I'm not entirely sure. Ammo capacity is nice to have as well, but it doesn't matter that much. And then try to get a mod slot on that as well. And in terms of your skill attributes, just try to be getting stuff towards your pulse or your first aid. But it's not really worth it to min-max that stuff because it's so hard to get stuff anyways. Now for your gloves, you're going to be rocking 204 gear score high-end gloves that have the talent Savage on them. Critical hit chance is increased by 14% against targets that have cover. This is absolutely amazing, especially for the M1A. And my AUG, it actually makes it to where with my AUG I almost have 100% critical hit chance. I actually did the math. I have a separate video on it. Link will be right here. I'll put it at the top. But I have 91.5% critical hit chance when using Savage gloves plus all these other things. So my crit is absolutely amazing. I'm critting almost every single hit, and when using an M1A, it's really nice to have. So make sure that you have these. Huge DPS increase. For the attributes, you want to be using critical hit damage, damage to elites, and 6% critical hit chance. Some people argue that SMG damage is better than damage to elites, but I don't necessarily agree. Maybe for PvP situations, but for player versus environment, I think that damage to elites is far superior. In terms of your holster, you can either, as you can see right here, this one is rocking armor. You can either switch your mod slot for armor, or you can just use a mod slot. It's really up to you. Holster doesn't matter much. Just make sure that it has all three attributes. If it doesn't have all three, it's pretty much ruled out as garbage at that point. So just make sure that you have a well balance between your health and your firearms. As of right now, you can see I have 2,600 stamina and about 3,000 firearms due to some mod slots and stuff, to try to make sure that it comes in where the tanky part comes in is you having your armor. So you can rule out some of your mod slots to get armor. I think you can get armor on a backpack, you can get armor on a holster. Actually, I think you can get it on everything. So just try to find a good balance of armor while still maintaining your mod slots and whatnot. So I'm attempting to switch out this one right now, and if I switch out this one, I'd probably have like 63% armor, and that's a pretty nice amount of armor. In terms of modding your gear, again, that's another way to get armor. I would have full armor. I would replace this one with that one to give me more armor, but the talent that I have on my AUG called Vicious requires 2579 stamina. And if I do that, I don't have enough stamina, but 2577 actually, 2 under it. That's such aids, but yeah, you can stack armor, and then if you don't need the extra armor, you can be stacking critical hit chance on your mod slot. Just make sure to put it with firearms and stamina just to give yourself a nice balance. So I forgot to go over why I'm using a Sentry's called 4 set, but it basically just because the 4 bonus is really good, but I'll still go over it. So the 2 set bonus, 30% headshot damage is really good. It stacks really nicely when using an M1A with Brutal, especially with an AUG with Brutal, so it's really awesome with the headshot damage. A set 3 bonus, 20% damage to elites, 20% flat out damage to elites. It's a pretty nice damage increase along with the other 20% I have for my other gear, so I'm doing a shitload of extra damage to elites. And then for the 4 set, this is probably the reason why this set is so amazing. Headshots mark the enemy, increasing the damage inflicted on the target by 15% for a duration of 10 seconds each, and you can stack it up to 3 marks. So basically, I can shoot this guy 1, 2, 3, 3 times in the head, and I will already have an increase of 45% damage, almost 50% damage on that enemy for an entire 10 seconds, and then all I have to do is get another 3 shots if it goes away, and I still get that damage increase. So my damage goes up by so much just from doing that, and it's actually quite insane, honestly. If you're not using it, you're missing out on that 50% damage. I definitely don't think that the extra 50% critical hit damage from Striker's Battlegear or the Striker's 4 set can even come close to competing with this. So yeah, 45% damage, I mean, come on, that's just amazing in of itself. Now, in terms of your abilities, you're going to be using First Aid and Pulse. I just have the Smart Cover on. You can use Smart Cover if you want. I just have it on for testing purposes, just to show you my damage in a little bit here. But you want to be using First Aid with either Booster Shot or Overdose. Defibrillator is decent when you're with other people, but I've seen that it doesn't work half of the time, so I'd say just use Overdose and Booster Shot. If you don't have that great of health, then I would say use Overdose, but if you have a decent amount of health and you'd like to have the extra damage, Booster Shot is nice to have. Now, for your other one, you're going to be using Pulse with Tactical Scanner. The reason I have smart cover on right now is because when testing, pulse only works for like half a second, so I can't really show you my accurate damage numbers. But when I use my pulse, I mean, but when you are going to be using your pulse, you're going to be using it with tactical scanner. I don't think any of the other ones are really viable, so just use tactical scanner. Increases your critical hit chance by 22% and critical hit damage by 48% depending upon your skill power, but your skill power should be generally similar to what mine is, so it should be basically around the same, and having that extra crit chance is huge, 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 along with that critical hit damage. Now for your special ability, you're going to be using Survivor Link. This is pretty obvious. I don't even need to get into it. If you don't use Survivor Link, you're kind of a fool. I don't mean to be an ass, but it's kind of true at this point. Like, the other ones just can't compare to it. Now for your talents, there's a lot of, not necessarily controversy, but a lot of people decide to use different things. I think what I'm using is probably the best, but it is up to you really. There are certain things that you can switch out, but I'm just going to read you over why I'm using mine and which ones I have. So I'm using Combat Medic. Use a med kit in your allies to heal group members and proxies within 20 meters by 40%. This might not sound like it actually helps, but it really does, because even when you're not with a group, it will still heal you for an extra 40%, and on their own, medkits heal for 60%, so then it ends up healing you 100% regardless of how much health you have. You will always get the full health, so that's pretty much a must just for situations where you almost die. Another one is none, headshot a hostile. They have a 50% chance of not consuming the bullet. If you're rushing with an SMG and you're aiming at the head, which you should be, constantly aiming at the head of the enemy because it does like 2 times more damage, especially if you have brutal. You can be doing that extra damage while getting half of the bullets that you do back into your magazine directly, which is really, really helpful and a huge DPS boost. Another thing to have is precision, headshot a hostile to pulse them for 10 seconds. This will, as you can see right there, says benefit pulse. It won't put the tactical scanner pulse, but it will put critical hit chance 16% and critical hit damage 32%, which is actually a pretty nice thing to have. And it also will just show you where they are when you're shooting at them. It'll put a little blimp over their head so you can see where they are through walls and stuff, so it's pretty nice. You can probably, if there's any of them to switch out, I'd say it's probably that one, or one is none. You could switch it out for something like critical save, or yeah, critical save is pretty much the only other one that's good. And then the next one, which is probably one of the best, kill a hostile while moving to reduce incoming damage by 30% for 10 seconds. If you're using an SMG, this doesn't sound that great, but when you're using an SMG, you're constantly moving while you're shooting somebody, or at least you should be, unless you're undercover, but most of the time you're shooting people, and it just makes you reduce incoming damage by 30% almost all of the time, because it's 10 seconds, and when you use this build, you melt people within like 2 seconds, and if you can kill 5 people, I'm not sure if it stacks, but if it does stack, you kill 5 people in say 10 seconds, and that's a whole almost a minute of 30% reduced incoming damage, so it is a really nice thing to have. Now, just to show the sheer damage, by the way, the dummy does not take into account all the damage that I am doing, because I have an extra damage to elites. Where the hell is it? I have an extra 39%, almost 40% damage to elites, which actually does a huge, huge, huge deal of extra damage. So, my damage is going to be a lot more substantial than you see on here by 40%. So, as you can see right here, I am critting 130k to the head with my AUG, and then if I use booster shot and smart cover, I am doing 178k. I guess my booster shot didn't last that long, but 178k is huge. And then with my M1A, and as you can see, I went to over 900k right there, but I can easily hit over 1 million in other situations. So that's going to be it for the gear. Anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this guide helped you, and if it did, please drop a like and subscribe if you want to see videos similar to this one later.